Nigel?
Yeah. This may be a little bit outside of what you've been talking about, but one of the things that strikes me is that one of the reasons why it's difficult for liberal ideas in many countries is that they seem to be alien to their national conditions. They seem to be like Western ideas being imported. So I wonder, to what extent have you been successful in finding national liberal traditions, national liberal historical figures that you can point to show that these ideas are not something alien, but they're part of your own traditions, but a tradition that perhaps has been forgotten and lost?
I think that's a very interesting question, and I think we'll answer the two we've had, and then we'll see what other ones there are. Well, obviously, the last ones was slightly more here in this side. So, Ali, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you.
I think you're going to use this one. I think the microphone's getting tabbed too.
I think as per the... As with the question of finding national figures or national ideas and treating them imported or local, my view is this, that it is very hard to distinguish even and to classify our own national figures as purely national. If I would think of my own historians of my country, they would have been educated somewhere in the West, even 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And there has been a kind of a cross-cultural ideas already inherited in our education and in our intellectual processes. But I think as far as the ideas are concerned, I don't find a problem in communicating those ideas or those universal ideas, as you may like to call them, into my society. The challenge which I face, though, is how to build a case in terms of putting up local examples, bringing, if we talk about economic freedom, how to bring the convincing local data which actually can support the ideas which have been universally tested. That is simply because of the fact that we maybe not knowing enough about our own history. I think the ideas are there, which are valid, which are universal. I don't find problem in communicating those ideas at an abstract level. But as I was saying in my presentation, when I'm trying to contextualize them into our local history, then I need more data, more local knowledge. And that combination of the idea plus local knowledge, I think that makes the trick.
Okay. Concerning Arabic countries, I think that we have a problem with the leadership. There's a long time that we are waiting for serious and credible reforms in Arab countries. And since the independence of Arab countries, we have only socialist reforms, socialist policies, but never policy who are market-oriented reform. And even in the 80s, 90s, when Arabic countries are constrained, Arab leaders are constrained to implement some policies who are market-oriented. So there was a partial reform. So the result was catastrophic. So I think, in my view, that we need a new leadership, and I believe that this new leadership can't be political or government officials. So I believe in entrepreneurs, for example, and intellectual entrepreneurs. So in bottom-up approach. With intellectual and economic entrepreneurs, we can have, I think, a more efficient approach to bring this political and economic change that we need in Arab countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas from Sweden. I was very attracted by Lena Löntjärva's proposal that one should find a key issue that would, in a way, explain liberal principles from that touched the core matter that common people were cared about. And you mentioned monetary reform in Lithuania, for example. And I think Hisham has, in a way, explained that trade and trade liberalization could be such a key in the Arab world. Unfortunately, and here I am a bit more maybe pessimistic about the bottom-up method that Hisham proposes, trade liberalizations, and you should correct me if I'm wrong in that, but when you look in history generally, has been initiated by prominent elite figures in their societies who have been very much in touch with how the public thinks and wants, and have been able to explain it to them in their own cultural context and language. But definitely it has been an elite project. In Turkey, for example, it was Turgut Özal who did it very prominently, and very much against some concepts are also counterintuitive. For example, if you wish to explain cooperative advantages of Ricardo, for example, it takes a seminar for that. But those people who were, in a way, political elite, but mostly young political elite, were able to catch both the audiences, but it was very much a top-down approach in liberalizing the economies. And I would like to hear Hisham commenting on, in the sense that a method, is it a method that you could be that you can educate the younger, upwardly moving political elite in these matters? Because that's what happened, for example, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in the Baltic countries, where we had in Sweden very much common projects with very young people, especially I know Estonia with Mark Laar and people like that were just in their 20s and 30s, but were able to catch and grasp the culture of their country. But still it was an elite project. So wouldn't it take too much time to do this bottom-up as you propose, Hisham?
Thank you for the good question. I am very conscious of the difficulties to this bottom-up approach. I haven't a guarantee that even bottom-up approach will lead to economic reforms who are fostering economic freedom, because we have a lot of groups, lobbies, who can defend their interests that, which are in opposition to markets or freedom. Okay? But if we continue to use the top-down approach, I think that we could wait for a long time without change. But if we observe the history of the emergence of some economic communities, there are some successful experiences and some successful examples. So when you take the ASEAN, economic communities for East Asia countries, the emergence of this community was facilitated by civil society, meaning enterprises, particularly Japanese companies. In the 60s, Japanese companies who was developed supply chain across borders. So forging economic networks of production and distribution with subcontractors from, for example, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. So by doing this, by strengthening the economic ties between this country, that was facilitated dramatically the emergence of this economic community. Also in the history of Arabic countries and the early period of Islam, the merchants have had a lot of power, which permit to them exert to make pressure on political leaders to maintain the to maintain the union, or economic and political union. But when trade routes become less safer, so merchants has lost their power, lowering pressure on political to maintain the economic and political integration. And now, when you observe the structure of Arab societies, the merchant class has not enough power to make pressure on Arabic leaders. So this is why we don't observe a movement for integration between Arabic countries. Thank you.
Or the stage on which we all perform, you might say. Everybody needs good ideas. Trade is the result of ideas. Adam Smith and others made the case that trade was a good thing, that it left people better off, that both sides to a free trade benefit. It was that spread of those ideas that in the 19th century produced the environment in which people actually progressed materially, but it stemmed from ideas. I think that's a universal principle, that ideas really do rule the world. And they can change events, change history, change society, but and ultimately they are at the root of, and they explain almost all major changes in every society.
Do I, as an individual person in the world of ideas, have to consume or acquire those good ideas? It's a free rider problem, right? If I live in a wealthy society, what do I care? It's rich whether I believe in the ideas of wealth creation or not. So the question is, how do we create incentives for people to want to understand and embrace the liberal ideas, knowing that the benefits of implementing them will accrue to them only a tiny fraction of the total value. So it's a standard free rider or public goods argument. What can we do to encourage people to want to understand and embrace such good ideas?
A very good point, Tom. I think it's important for people to understand that we are all part of a bigger picture, and that sometimes what may be in the most immediate personal benefit for ourselves just isn't everything. I'm not explaining this as well as I would like. It's been a long day. All of us have a very powerful stake, I think, in the general temper of ideas. Certainly that's the case if you're thinking long term. What do I want not just tomorrow to look like, but what do I want 10 years from now to look like? What do I want 30 years from now for my children or grandchildren to look like? If those things are important to you, then all of a sudden the ideas become much more important, because they are what will shape tomorrow much more than they may be shaping the present moment.
I think that the point made by Tom is very important. The problem of incentive is very central for our work. I developed in my presentation the idea that we need, obviously, to disseminate freedom idea, etc. But practicing idea or freedom idea is also important. So, how to give incentives for people to practice freedom on market institutions. This is very important, because when people practice market institutions, they will benefit, they will show directly, concretely, the benefits of markets. So will be more convincing. I think that is very important.
And if I'd just like to add a comment, I think some people are more far-sighted, and they just do care about those who are poor and oppressed. They have more time to do it. They look around and see other people are better off than themselves. And I mean, the good thing about good ideas is you only need a few people to have them and propagate them, and if they can get taken up, So you have almost the reverse, I think, of what you're saying. You need very few people to be moved and to think and work on these things, and it has a huge benefit for millions of people. So that's a great incentive for the few. And if you're Adam Smith and you're seeing all these things go on and you understand the solutions, think of the excitement of writing them down and seeing all those people who benefit from them. At least that, I would think that. Anyway, that's my feeling. Did Tom want to say some more?
I wanted to add
Just a minute, I'll turn off and you turn on.
one more quick point, and that is why heroes and people we admire are so important. I admire Khalil Ahmad. I admire what you've done in Pakistan. The one person to stand up, reject Marxism, which you had been ingrained in you, and say, I'm going to stand up for what my mind tells me is right, and do it for the good of the whole society. I admire Professor Ramiz Poor. When I get tired or depressed, and I just say, I can't do this, be here till 4 o'clock in the morning, I think of Professor Ramiz Poor standing up for liberty under the Taliban. And that is an inspiration for all of us to want to be the best people we can be. So I think having heroes in our movement, people from the past and people from the present who we admire, this is part of what Elena was talking about, I think, that we aspire to be certain kinds of people. That's a value we deliver to other people, to have the identity of being a brave person who stands up for what's right, even under difficult circumstances. So I think of the people in this room, when I get depressed, I think they're working for liberty, how can I not?